welcome to the 2024, the review of 2024 Mistake of the Year. May I present your host, Russell Napier.
Thank you, David, and welcome everybody to the Library of Mistakes. We're here to celebrate a year of mistakes because that's how we learn from other people's mistakes. We don't really learn from our own, but maybe we can learn from others. So just a brief introduction to the library for those of you who don't know us and how mistakes fits within the library, because this is something bigger than just a library of mistakes. It is actually a library of business and financial history, and one subset of that, though sadly quite a large one, is the one-off mistakes. Apart from running this library, we have libraries in Lausanne in Switzerland. We have libraries in Pune in India. We will almost certainly open in London this year, the first time that London will have been an importer of mistakes for quite some time. And we will open in Singapore either this year or next year. So if you're interested in contributing in any way to Singapore and London financially or otherwise, let me know. And plans are afoot for Mumbai. So why, suddenly, does the world want mistakes? Or more importantly, why does the world want some insight into business and financial history? What's happened in the world that suddenly this is beginning to catch on? So I wanted to read something from Edinburgh's Nobel laureate in economics, a man called Angus Deaton, who has explained why, at an advanced age, why it's time, he believes, to begin to study financial history and why this library is here and why we're growing. So this is from something that Angus Deaton said last year at the IMF, and it's called Rethinking My Economics. And it's great to be, I think Angus is in his 80s, and he's still rethinking in his 80s. And he said this about the existing state of economics, finance, and investment, and where we should be going. He said, the credibility revolution in econometrics was an understandable reaction to the identification of causal mechanisms by assertion, often controversial and sometimes incredible. But, this is the but from the Nobel laureate, the currently approved methods, randomized controlled trials, differences in differences, or regression discontinuity designs, have the effect of focusing attention on local effects and away from potentially important but slow-acting mechanisms that operate with long and variable lags. Historians who understand about contingency and about multiple and multi-directional causality often do a better job than economists of identifying important mechanisms that are plausible, interesting, and worth thinking about, even if they do not meet the inferential standards of contemporary applied economics. So that, if we were writing a manifesto when we launched the Library of Mistakes 10 years ago, that kind of would have been our manifesto, and that is why we're here. So apart from this library and these other libraries, we also have this live streamed, and everything we do here in the evenings is live streamed. It's recorded. So we've built up really quite a big collection now of wonderful lectures that are all recorded, and you can find those and access those on the website. We have a podcast, which amazingly is in the top 5% in the world of global podcasts in terms of popularizing financial history. And there is now a little festival of mistakes, and you'll find that at Hay Castle on Hay-on-Wye, which is in conjunction with our friends, the trustees of Hay Castle. So the world of mistakes is going from strength to strength. What we learn, probably before we can walk, maybe even before we can speak, is this: pointing the finger of blame. Pointing the finger at somebody else, even before you can talk, maybe before you can walk. And that is really not why we're here tonight, because that is literally quite childish. We're here to celebrate the world of mistakes. It was Teddy Roosevelt who said, the only man who never makes a mistake is the man who never does anything. So we don't come here to castigate these mistakes necessarily. As I mentioned earlier, or to some people in the front row, we have a quote as you walk into this library, which says, mistakes are the portals of discovery. That's a quote from James Joyce. And I think my favorite is from the American football coach, Vince Lombardi, who said, if you're not making mistakes, you're not trying hard enough. So to be clear, or you're not taking enough risks. We come here to look at these mistakes from people who often tried hard and sometimes, as we'll discover, perhaps didn't try hard enough. It is difficult to live with one's own mistakes, but easy to live with other people's mistakes. So we come here to study those. We live in an era where it is more important than ever to have a bigger picture of how things fit together, which is where financial history and mistakes come in. More and more the world works in silos, and each silo not talking to each other. The world actually probably is getting more interconnected through the speed of technology, and yet we respond to that by going into silos. So by studying mistakes and hopefully by getting a view that spills us over between the silos, we get a better understanding of what can go wrong, and who knows, one day maybe do something to intervene. The other reason we exist is because of this thing called human decision-making under uncertainty. And many of you will recognize that from the Nobel Prize citation for Daniel Kahneman, the father, along with Amos Tversky, of behavioral finance. But Tversky and Kahneman studied the psychology of the individual and human decision-making under uncertainty. So many of the mistakes in this room, whether in financial markets or corporates, are not the mistake of an individual, they're the mistake of a group. So tonight, and in the work we do here, we're studying group decision-making under uncertainty and the mistakes that come from that. And as I said, hopefully a way to reduce those going forward. There is one profession that learns from all its mistakes without fail, and they are called pilots. And the reason pilots learn is nobody can do this because there's a thing called the black box, and the black box holds the truth about who made the mistake or who in which system failed, which individual failed, or which group failed. And I like to think as this library or financial history in general as the black box. This is what we turn to when we try to work out somewhat objectively as to who made the mistakes, why they went wrong, and how we improve the system. We're living in a more uncertain world. I think we all understand that. A world of accelerated political change, a world of accelerated technological change. But we've lived through these before. And the lessons on how to cope with that and how to deal with that are in history. Now, maybe they're not as fast as they currently are, but clearly we've been through that before. Signals need to be heard. Quite often in the modern era, signals are not heard. If you go onto social media and look at your friends' social media accounts, you'll see they live in a lovely, wonderful wonderland where nothing ever goes wrong. Everybody's always skinny and the sun always shines. We are burying or hiding our mistakes, so we are here to celebrate them. So with that, what I think is a rather brief introduction, now we come to the nominations for some of 2024's Library of Mistakes.
We're delighted to have Paul come up. We're delighted to have Paul Cosmatatos with us here, one of the most distinguished academics at Edinburgh, to announce this award.
No, let me do it. So, Paul,
Not open it yet.
Not open it yet. Give it to me, and I'll hold it.
Okay.
Thank you. No,
Thank you.
Come back in 20 minutes.
20 minutes?
20 minutes, yeah. We're only at the nominations.
Well, this is the third.
Okay.
This is the third.
Oh, this is the...
I'm going to do about 10
So
nominations.
I'm less distinguished.
Oh.
My sincere apologies. That's mistake number one.
So we'll run through some of the also-rans, and then guess who's going to announce number 3? But let's go through some of the also-rans. Now, when I asked you all for nominations, and we have a really large number of readers, I was very disappointed with the responses because virtually every response reflected the political opinion of the person who sent the email. Now, it may be true that Rachel Reeves should win Mistake of the Year every single year, but it may not be true. It may be true that people who vote for Donald Trump should win mistakes every year, but that's not what we do here. We're doing business and financial history and learning from those mistakes and finding lessons for the future. So thank you for all your political opinions, but next year, can we focus more on business, financial mistakes of the year and what we might learn from them? Now, there are lots of corporate mistakes here. Every corporate mistake in this room has one thing in common. They all had an auditor. Now, a year cannot go by without a mistake from one of the big 4 audit companies, and that, in terms of nominations, that is where we'll begin. So this year, of the big 4, it will be PBOC that takes the honours to be on this list of also-rans for Mistake of the Year. and they are PwC China, who were the auditor of Evergrande, for those of you who have heard of it. But let me tell you what it is by reading a little extract. Chinese developer Evergrande was at its pinnacle in 2018, having been listed as the most valuable real estate company in the world in 2018. But in 2024, the property developer's reputation crumbled when Chinese regulators accused it of fabricating sales figures that inflated its revenues by $78 billion in 2019 and 20, despite audits to the contrary conducted by PwC China. In September 2024, the Regulatory Commission banned PwC China for 6 months and imposed a fine of $62 million, the heaviest penalty ever imposed on an international accounting firm in China. PwC faced criticism for serious lapses in its audit, including drawing false conclusions and failing to maintain professional skepticism during the audit, which led to the concealment of errors. And the final line is the CRSC noted that 88% of PwC's records did not accurately reflect the status of Evergrande's projects, with some projects reported as completed despite being vacant land. I think we can say it's a mistake. I hope it was only a mistake. So this year, an honorable mention has to go to PwC China. Next, Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music. You'll notice we only attack the world's biggest companies, or we only bring up the world's biggest companies here. Now, I'm going to read you something which I think is a first, but we have some very experienced and smart people in this world who can tell me that it isn't the first. But these three companies created a new mistake, as far as I can see. They created a business model which allowed someone to be both supply and demand at the same time and to generate a commission. Now, I know you're looking at me and saying, isn't that private equity? But leaving aside private equity, let's go back to Apple, Spotify, and Amazon Music. This is a little excerpt I'm going to read you from Fraud magazine. So I now read Fraud. I think I used to start with the Beano, and now I'm doing Fraud magazine. Anyway, U.S. prosecutors charged North Carolina musician Michael Smith with a scheme that exploited digital music platforms, including Spotify, Apple Music, and Amazon Music, with fake songs and bands. Smith reportedly used artificial intelligence to engineer thousands of fake songs with titles like Zygotic Washstands and Zymotechnical by bogus bands with names like Callous Post, Calorie Scream, and Calvinistic Dust. He used bots to stream the songs millions of times. Smith allegedly collected more than $10 million in royalty payments over the 7 years of his scheme. So Smith became supply, Smith became demand, and Smith got the commission. If you have any other businesses like that, please cut me in for 25%, assuming, of course, that they're legal. Now, I noticed that one of these bands was called Calvinistic Dust, so this is a good Edinburgh audience, so I know you'll all be listening to that this evening. An honourable mention to them. I thought I would mention the people of Japan in aggregate, because this, I thought, was a stunning statistic from Japan last year. The number of bankruptcies linked to labour shortages jumped 80% in Japan. Companies going bankrupt because they can't get enough people, and that was hitting a record high. The last time the Japanese had a birth rate that would replace its existing population was 1975. The point is that sometimes it can take a very long time for mistakes or the consequences of actions to come to fruition. So the inability of the Japanese birth rate to stay anywhere near 2.1 from 1975 is a factor, not the only factor, but a factor in creating bankruptcies today. One of the real problems in having a mistake of the year 2024 is very few of them, almost none of them, are mistake made in 24, consequences in 24. They're almost invariably laid many, many years before. In researching for tonight, of course, I look at the list of bankruptcies, and we are mainly of a certain age in this room, so I'm sad to tell you that last year we lost Avon Products and Tupperware. But the good news is they went into Chapter 11. So for those of you who know US bankruptcy proceedings, they will almost certainly be back again. And in the world of bankruptcy, 11 comes before 7. So it's only Chapter 7 you have to worry about. Chapter 11, I think we'll see Avon products and we'll see Tupperware yet again. In terms of Chapter 11, I think there's a new record being set. I will have to do some more research on this, but it sounds like a record to me, and that relates to Party City. Party City is an American chain of party stores founded in 1986, the largest retailer of party goods in Canada, Puerto Rico, and Mexico. And on September the 6th, 2023, it had gone into Chapter 11 bankruptcy. It was to eliminate over $1 billion of debt on September the 6th, 2023. That's 2023. The story is, in December 2024, it went back into Chapter 11, making it going into Chapter 11 twice in 18 months. But it is Chapter 11, so I think we'll hear from Party City again. Some things never die. Fisker, I don't know who's familiar with Fisker, but it is an automobile company, makes or made electrical vehicles. On 13th of July 2020, Henrik Fischer announced that Fisker Inc. would go for an IPO through a merger with something called a special acquisition vehicle. And we'll come back to that at the end as to why that's important. This valued the company in July 2020 at $2.9 billion US, and in 2024 it filed for bankruptcy, and there were actions taken against it by the SEC. Now, the good news is the company did make some cars between 2020. In May 2023, it began delivery. It has made 10,000 cars, 5,000 of which have been delivered. And for those history buffs in the audience, DeLorean made 9,000 cars. So there is a similarity there. So why the mistake? Two things. This is a $2.9 billion company. It has some high-profile venture capitalists involved in it. And I just wanted to read you a little article from TechCrunch magazine describing the internal processes of this $2.9 billion company. The company lost track of payments made, taking months to complete an internal audit, with external auditor, PBOC, receiving inadequate documentation from Fisker to compile their annual financial report. Fisker's CFO attempted to run customer services using a digital chatbot rather than a call center, leading to customers struggling to get help. Fisker then hired a company to provide customer service, which later sued Fisker for failure to pay. The CFO also allegedly refused to build a stockpile of parts for service to cut costs. The company did not set up a supplier quality team to audit suppliers, leading to substandard quality of parts and vehicles. In order to service cars, Fisker started pinching parts from their supplier, their production line in Austria, and then stripping down returned cars and using the parts for marketing. And this included stripping down the car of the owner of the company, Henrik Fisker. The suppliers and employees were also asked to bring parts from Austria in their luggage when returning from holidays. So $2.9 billion, that's what you get. And it runs a similarity with what was going on in terms of internal systems at FTX just last year. But one of the reasons for mentioning it is that just a few years ago we had this SPAC thing, where you had a shell of a company. You weren't allowed to know what it was for, but we would inject equities, or we would inject businesses into it. Now, I started in this business in 1989, and the great example of something that would never happen again, no matter how mad the world got, was what happened in 1720. So I want to read you what happened in 1720 from the incredible Mackay's book, Extraordinary Popular Delusions and the Madness of Crowds, which is largely a work of fiction, but there is some fact in there as well. And this was Mackay writing in 1841. You can tell from the name he's a Scot, a Scottish journalist. The most absurd and preposterous of all the new projects of 1720, which showed more completely than any other the utter madness of the people, was one started by an unknown adventurer entitled A Company for Carrying On an Undertaking of Great Advantage, but nobody to know what it is. Were not the facts stated by scores of credible witnesses, it would be impossible to believe that any person could have been duped by such a project. And it seemed that we'd never see its like again until the SPAC bubble came along. And if you invested in SPACs, invariably you've lost an awful lot of money. So that's Fisker. Now, I also want to mention a company which is not a profit-making company. It's a not-for-profit, and it is called the Romance Writers of America. And it does exactly what it says on the tin. The Romance Writers of America is an American non-profit writers association founded in 1980. Its mission is to, quote, advance the professional and common business interests of career-focused romance writers through networking and advocacy and by increasing public awareness of the romance genre. In May 2024, it filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy, stating that it owed millions of dollars in contracts to convention centres for hotel rooms. An 80% decline in membership since 2019, described by the Romance Writers of America as, quote, predominantly due to disputes concerning diversity, equity and inclusion issues between some members of a prior RWA board and others in the romance writing community. So all is not healthy in the romance writing community. And for those of you who still believe in romance, it filed for Chapter 11 in 2024. I suspect every year we'll have to mention crypto, which will get me hate mail because apparently everything's a fraud and crypto is just a small subset, but we'll mention it anyway. And I read now from the Kansas Reflector newspaper. Anybody who's familiar with the Kansas Reflector? It's a good read. Damn sight better than Fraud Magazine. Anyway, and I read Shan Haynes, the CEO of Heartland Tri-State Bank, is charged in federal district court with embezzling $47 million between May and July of last year. If convicted, he could spend 30 years in prison. At one stage, Haynes asked the CFO of the bank for $12 million. He said there was a problem with a wire transfer from Hong Kong. The CFO said, he showed me this app on his phone. There was a balance of some $40 million in the account, but he needed another $12 million to access it. The CFO, a former certified public accountant, turned him down. He said, I think you're in a scam. The same day, according to a timeline in the report, Haynes made an $8 million wire transfer from the bank. The CFO believes that at that point, Haynes was already $30 million in debt. On July 21st, the bank's chief financial officer notified regulators of this suspicious activity. 6 days later, Heartland Bank had a negative net worth of $35 million. On July 28th, the Kansas Office of State Bank Commissioner closed Heartland and appointed the FDIC as receiver. The estimated cost of this bank failure at $54 million. Depositors were made good in full, but the damage to the community in Kansas continues. It's not clear how much money was lost in crypto last year. I did try to find that out. The range of estimates is $2.5 to $5 billion in fraud conducted in crypto. So I think we'll be returning to this one going forward. I suspect also every year we should have a subset prize for worst corporate communications of the year. If so, this year absolutely must go to Mattel Toys, who I think you'll probably be familiar with, mainly famous for making dolls. Last year there was a launch of a movie called Wicked. It's nominated for several Oscars. It's a continuation of the Wizard of Oz story. And Mattel decided to make dolls to coincide with the launch of the movie. And not surprisingly, given it was tied in with the movie, they put the website address for the movie on the side of the box, which then went out to, let's say, preteen girls effectively buying the dolls. The website address they put on the side of the box, and I strongly recommend you don't go there, was not called wickedmovie.com, which they should have put on the side of the box. It was called wicked.com. It's a major pornography website. So I quote from the Los Angeles Times. Mattel was sued yesterday by a South Carolina mother for mistakenly putting a link to a pornographic website on packaging for dolls tied to the blockbuster movie Wicked. In a proposed class action filed in federal court in Los Angeles, Holly Ricketson said she bought a Wicked doll for her daughter, who then visited an adult entertainment website through the link provided by the toy maker. Ricketson said her daughter showed her hardcore photographs from the website. Both were horrified by what they saw, suffering emotional distress. The plaintiff said that she would not have bought the doll had she known of the mistake, and the suit is for $5 million. And let's see whether anybody else joins that. Now, one final nomination before we get to our three winners, three losers. And should the Library of Mistakes be in the business of forecasting the future? Should we be in the business of saying this is going to be a mistake? Well, it's something that we tend to shy away from, but sometimes they're so obvious that we have to bring them to your attention. And in that regard, we have to mention the pension fund, or the lack of a pension fund, for Britain's 5 million public sector workers. It's an unfunded, index-linked pension scheme, the burden of which will fall upon future taxpayers, 5 million people. The current valuation of that is a liability of 1,420 billion, using creative actuarial assumptions, I think it's fair to say. Using more realistic actuarial assumptions, that number would probably be 300 billion pounds higher, which is quite a bit more than the 22 billion black hole that is featuring quite a lot in the press today. So this is one of those chickens which will never come home to roost until it comes home to roost, because no politician has any incentive to do anything about it. So we flag that one up, as one of our members has been advocating for this to be brought to people's attention for a long time, and I think is correct to do so. But whether there's ever any political will to deal with this problem, who knows? And now, I would like to ask Paul Cosmatatos.
Previously one of Edinburgh's most respected academics, until he was forced to prematurely. Paul.
Thank you. Thank you. So I just read the third prize, I guess.
Just open it up.
Okay. Oh, an envelope within an envelope. Oh, no, it's a card. Okay. And it is Guinness, the beer. I don't know why, but I feel a bit upset that the beer...
I will explain, because I know you're a great fan of whiskey, so whiskey also comes into it. Okay. So it's Diageo/Guinness. If you're a shareholder of Diageo, you'll know you've had a pretty torrid time. Actually, the share price is only up by 16% in the last 11 years. You have had some nice dividends along the way. There was a big mistake by the company in 2024 to add to a run of those, and that was with inventory management in Latin America, but that is not why we have it nominated tonight. There was something that came along which I think was probably unforeseeable, and that is weight loss drugs, which apparently are putting some people off alcohol, but not everybody. That one I think we can hardly blame the management for. But the one I wanted to pick out was the great man himself brewed that first pint of Guinness in 1759. And as far as I am aware, between 1759 and today, which includes 2 world wars, continental war with France, and a couple of pandemics, they never yet ran out of Guinness until 2024. So to Guinness, Diageo, for running out of its core product for the first time since 1759, I think a special mention is merited, and that is number 3. And now, David, we have someone to bring me the winner of the second place for Mistake of the Year for 2024.
It's Charles Heenan. Charles.
I should say that for those who don't know, Charles is the man who buys all the alcohol, so a round of applause for Charles.
And in second place for 2024. Boeing.
Boeing. So the problem with Boeing, and this is, which year was the year of mistakes for Boeing? Because there have been so many years of mistakes for Boeing. But let me read from The Economist on what 2024 held for Boeing. Quote, Boeing had a terrible year. In January, a panel fell off one of its planes after takeoff, leaving a gaping hole in the side of the aircraft. The incident turned up more safety mishaps in Boeing's manufacturing process, leading to the resignation of Dave Calhoun as CEO. To top it all, Boeing's workers went on strike, causing more delays to production. So lots of companies have mistakes. The problem, of course, as we know, is that some of Boeing's historical mistakes have cost lives, and people have died. In an accident in 2018, 189 passengers died in Indonesia, and soon thereafter in Ethiopia, another 157 passengers. But why? Well, I'm going to read from a book, a wonderful book. We have it in here. I recommend reading it. It's called The Right Kind of Wrong by Amy Edmondson. And this is what she says about Boeing. And she takes this right back to the merger between Boeing and a company called McDonnell Douglas in 1997. And she says this, before the acquisition, Boeing's top executives tended to come from engineering backgrounds, sharing a common technical language and sensibility with Boeing employees. The shared engineering sensibility helped engineers through the organization feel safe to raise engineering concerns. There was a company culture shift from Boeing's historical emphasis on engineering to McDonnell Douglas's historical emphasis on finance. Let me give you some numbers around that. This is from the Financial Times. Plane maker Boeing, which is struggling to turn around its finances, has come under fire for conducting $44 billion of buybacks between 2013 and 19, rather than investing that money in improving its operations. The company declined to comment on this criticism. Underinvestment, overinvestment, they're two different sides of the same coin. They are inaccurate investment, they are misinvestment, and the seeds of whatever's been going on at Boeing, which is still, it seems to be repaired based on 2024, were sown a very long time ago. So because of this, Boeing comes in at number 2 on our list of mistakes of the year. And now we come to that big moment which somebody in the world is dreading, and that is the winner of this year's Mistake of the Year.
Introduced by Lauren, who runs the library, in case you hadn't noticed.
And the winner, everybody's a winner these days, or maybe loser, the People's Bank of China.
Thank you. I was a bit. When you give an award to the Central Bank of China and bangs start going off in the audience, you can get a little bit concerned. So for those of you who don't know who the People's Bank of China is, and it's easy to get them mixed up with other organizations, it's the Central Bank of China, it's the Bank of England for China, because there's also the Taiwanese one, there's also a commercial Bank of China, but this is the People's Bank of China. Now, the reason that it is the People's Bank of China is, as I mentioned, it is really exceptionally rare for a mistake to be made in 1 year and to come to fruition in the same year. But actually, the People's Bank of China managed that in 6 months. So let me explain. Last year, the winner, their award is still here, they haven't been to pick it up, was Silicon Valley Bank. And we awarded it to Silicon Valley Bank because they managed to go bankrupt or had to be bailed out by buying what is known as the risk-free asset, which is quite an achievement to buy the risk-free asset and find yourself needing a bailout. The problems at the People's Bank of China also concern the risk-free asset. Now, this bank, which you may or may not know, has spent most of its life, certainly over the last 30 years, defending the exchange rate or managing its exchange rate, managing the value of that exchange rate relative to the United States dollar. And that demands certain activities in terms of intervention. But in August, it suddenly announced that it would be doing that, but it would also be doing this. And what it would be doing over here is simultaneously, it would be doing what other central bankers do, which is what we sometimes call quantitative easing. And that is, it would go into the market and it would buy bonds every day, every week, every month, and it would add more and more money into the system, regardless what was happening in the exchange rate. Now, you didn't have to be a genius to work out that you would be doing two contradictory things at the same time. There is a reason why they didn't buy any bonds from 2007 to 2024, because it was contradictory. But they started it in August, 9th of August, 2024, and it finished. It was abandoned on the 9th of January, 2025. The marquee reflation project of a central bank launched and abandoned within 6 months, because the more money they created through buying these bonds, the more the downward pressure was on the exchange rate, which any financial historian would have been able to explain in great detail before they even started the process. So I think we know potentially where the policy came from, and I'm not mentioning his name for sure. There have been firings at the Forex regulator because of this failure of policy, which I think is really a bit like court-martialing the survivors of the charge of the Light Brigade. But anyway, someone had to fall on their sword, and they have fallen on their sword. So this year, because it showed a lack of understanding of financial history and the consequences of ignoring financial history, and the fact that it was all achieved within a 6-month period, then this year's winner of Mistake of the Year is the People's Bank of China. And that is it. And that concludes 25 minutes of Mistake of the Year. As you know, there could be a lot more. My 25 minutes is plenty. Next year, let's have lots of nominations that aren't your least favourite politician. And we will continue this. I don't think we'll have maybe as quite a controversial winner next year, but you will decide. So thank you very much. Please join us for drinks, courtesy of Charles and Kennox Asset Management. And our next event will be on the 12th of February with a man called J.P. Smith, who has been an emerging market strategist for about 40 years. I've known him for almost all of that time, and we will discuss investing in emerging markets, myth, reality, what it actually is, what it says it is, lessons learned over 40 years of investing in those markets. So thank you for coming along tonight in January. It's wonderful to see so many of you here, and I hope you will stay and join us for a drink. Thank you. I'm going to pop this up here. What? There's a very big embassy at Merrifield. Would you like to deliver it?
It's all been nice having a mistake.